Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to the main event Champions League history show here on Heart and Hand. This is part 3 of 0203, which means we're going to revel in the glory of one of the greatest Champions League finals of all time at Old Trafford between Milan and Juve. I know these two guys are just champing at the bit to get into the detail of this final and the semis before them. How are we doing, Adam?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, absolutely buzzing for it.
I can just tell it's coming through the screen. How are we doing, Davey?
Oh, share Adam's buzz about it. I mean, as finals go, it has absolutely everything. What, Martin? I can't read your writing. It has absolutely everything I look for in a match.
Well, good. We'll get some purists on the show then. That's good to hear. We finished last week with Ronaldo running amok at Old Trafford. Real Madrid found themselves in a semi with Juve, and they had the first leg at home. And Adam, he's doing it again. He scores the first goal, 23 minutes. And I think Clive Tilsley had said at the end of that Old Trafford game, they'll be back here. They must be back here in the final. Who the hell's going to beat them? They're too good. And it looks that way in the Bernabeu. David Trezeguet equalises just before half-time, and Real do win on the night. Bobby Carlos stepping up as he does in the second half, but not maybe the advantage that they imagined. However, what they did at Old Trafford has to still be in the equation as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Everything that you said there. This is peak Galactico era now. I think I'm not sure we quite covered that on the last show, albeit we did speak about Ronaldo. But yeah, I think this is for me like the top of it. Absolutely, you've got a couple of interesting battles in here as well. Obviously, Zidane back at Juventus as well. I think I know we spoke about Pavel Nedved. I thought he was really fantastic in particularly these two games. Against Madrid, probably played a big part in getting them to where they had to go in this, particularly in the second leg. Obviously, with the fantastic result. But yeah, I think it's easy in hindsight. Your mind doesn't necessarily play tricks on you, but when you see Madrid doing what they did, game before, everybody was speaking about Ronaldo, absolutely everybody, and it's one of those things where you just think, well, it's Madrid, it's the Champions League, they've got Ronaldo, he's coming into form at the right time. You wouldn't really think, particularly Juventus, who haven't had a great. They've been in Champions League finals, but they're not necessarily a team that goes all the way, as we now know, even more so. I think it looked like it would only be one way, even with just that narrow victory there. You're thinking, right, okay, they've got all this firepower. There's no way they don't score. In the Delle Alpi, they do score, but it's pretty much the last kick of the ball, and it's a consolation. Yeah,
David, it was an absolute chasing they got.
Yes,
and I don't know if who predicted this, but it was one of those nights, kind of harking back, I guess, to the mid-90s Juve. The last hurrah, I suppose. They were superb, and Trezeguet again. It's all made by Del Piero, and Del Piero's what for the second goal. I mean, it's just superb. It's one of those blitzkriegs, I guess, we were so used to seeing far later, especially with Liverpool. Barcelona could do as well. That Real Madrid were just shocked.
I think so, yeah. As was I, if I'm being honest, because to Adam's point there, I fully expected that Real Madrid would do enough. Maybe, the early goal to cancel it, the away goal, and then they could sit in as desperate Juve had to come on to them, and that really was not the case. The Juventus took this game completely early on. They started ferociously. They really did in this particular game, and as you say, half time they're 2-0 up. deservedly so. I think then at the start of the second half, kind of expected a bit of an onslaught from Real Madrid that didn't really come. And when Juventus then, if you like, almost got to the 60-minute mark, we're pretty comfortable here. And I think shocked is a great description of it, Martin, because as I say, you would expect a team with Real Madrid's experience in it. Let's not forget, as well as talent, there was a lot of experience in there to regroup. Say, right, okay, lads, special night at an old stadium, but it's only 3-2 in aggregate. Get the next goal, and we're very much in it. But it never looks like happening. And as Adam says, the Zidane goal at the end is met with ironic cheers from the home crowd, because obviously ex-player who'd left them. Like, there's a lot of talent in this Juventus side, let's not kid ourselves, but I just think that the Old Trafford performance they looked irresistible, and when that club looks irresistible at a late stage of a Champions League, then it's not a silly thing to predict that they will take some stopping. And I just think that perhaps, we are only 5-6 years removed from the absolute glory. You're still meeting a club that kind of expect that they should be in finals themselves. And
no inferiority complex. I mean, I know it's a great Real Madrid and they've won how many they've won, but it's still Juve. You're absolutely right. We'll come
I think it's
back.
Fair to say as well I think it's fair to say as well that although you look at that second leg and you think it's a bit of a formality, watching back some parts of it, Buffon had a ridiculous game. Some amount of saves he made. He obviously saved the penalty from where was it? Figo? I think Figo scored the penalty as well. So you've obviously still got the away goals and the victory from the 1-goal lead from the first leg. It was a really exciting semi-final. I think this one, but I just need to go back to, for me, I thought Nedved was absolutely
You think he should have a touch, Adam, don't you? When he goes through, you think, he's going to have to just he's got more space and he's got more time. He just takes another touch and it's just fucky, and it's bulleted in. It's an absolutely brilliant goal, which was a kind of fitting reward for his season. That season,
100%. He was. I think I did sort of trail this on the last one. He wasn't terrific for Juventus overall for me, but similar to Zidane, he had one exceptional season, I think, for Juventus, and this was it. Of course, Nedved channeling Roy Keane from a few years earlier gets booked in this game after having an absolutely terrific semi-final, gets his one too many yellow cards, missed the final, and to be honest, that might be why, if he'd been in that final, it could have been very different for Juve and probably a very, very different game overall. He was just electric, just the way that he could receive the ball, the speed. I think he did things at quite. I used to try and liken him, not maybe it's the hair, but like a left-sided Mendieta at times, but he had a lot more poise and creativity about him, and he was a lot quicker. I think with the ball at his feet, much more of an attacking dribbler than Mendieta. I thought he was terrific in this semi-final particularly, but this season for Juventus, he absolutely ran the show.
And ironically, that he's become so synonymous with Juventus, whereas, as Adam says, I think his better days were at other clubs in Italy. But he then goes on to be, sporting director and on the board and arrested with the rest of them last year. He's in with the bricks. That's your set. But
he understands the culture of the club, David.
Yeah, until you've been lifted with the director, then yeah. But no, he was also a terrific finisher, I think, that maybe gave him a slight advantage over Mendieta for me, just because he had that ability to, like Lampard, actually, just if he found himself there, he almost always chose the correct finish. And yeah, terrific football. I don't know if any of him would have made a difference in that final, but he might have done. He was a top class player playing at the absolute zenith of his abilities, but yeah, it didn't last long, and it's kind of strange that it became so synonymous and part of the club.
And as a man with a jealous appreciation, his hair was utterly magnificent.
Wonderful.
And just kind of continued along those lines. We'll speak again about Juventus, obviously, in the final, Adam, just how they've kind of set themselves up. But the other semi-final is a derby, the Milan derby, of course. First leg, as all first legs should be, were 0-0. And Milan, the home team, I don't know what that really means in the San Siro. I presume more support and most of the ground.
Yeah,
half and half.
No, you're right. That's when they do that. It's split to an away section, and basically all the livery is of the home team. They're in the home dressing room, etc., etc. Then the following week it's all swapped around.
But obviously, the intrigue of this is that Milan win on away goals. Obviously,
it's wonderful.
The most complicated away goals ever when you're both playing at home. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You knew, both teams knew that even though it's the same ground, their ground.
Yeah.
And it's also not unusual for them to be in their away dressing room because they do it every year as part of derby. So there was nothing unusual in this, but a huge advantage to having the second game nominally as your home game as. As the second game as the away, because you know what you've got to do, as we will see. But while the other game there was free flowing football, these were two incredibly cautious teams who they were having what they held in that first leg. Put it that way. Before they would worry about scoring after they'd made sure they locked everything down at the back.
Yeah, for sure. The first leg was 0-0, and not for the first time tonight. That doesn't mean it was drab. I mean, I think it's United. Milan were the absolute dominant team. They're all over them. Shevchenko's unlucky. It's just one of those nights. And Shevchenko eventually does get on the score sheet, Adam, in the second leg, and the vital away goal wheels away in delight. It's just such a huge moment. Inter do get an equaliser. 6 minutes to go through big Martins.
Obafemi.
Obafemi Martins, pre-Newcastle.
Yeah.
But this, even in the away leg, in inverted commas, it's still Milan doing all the running. From the footage out there, Inter aren't really in this, Adam. It's the tightest of margins, but the correct outcome.
Yeah, and to be honest, spoiler alert, I think it's probably similar for the final. If I'm honest. But yeah, I think you're right. Shevchenko gets that crucial goal, like you said. Not a great Champions League scoring season for Shevchenko. He's been mentioned many, many times on here. I don't know, 4 already probably.
Yeah.
In terms of his great European goals. This was not one of them. Certainly, I think he only got 4 in the tournament. It probably sums up where this was at this time. It was not the goals galore that we've seen from a couple of years before, outside of maybe 1 or 2 of those late knockout games. It was very Italian last few rounds of the competition. But yeah, I think I was going to say this was I don't know if Shevchenko maybe was injured at this time, or there was a bit of an adaptation, because I think we'll come on to Milan's tactics maybe when we're talking about the final part of it. But he only got 10 goals this year for Milan, which was a bit of a low point when you consider he was hitting high 30s for Kiev, and then similar for the first couple of years at Milan, and then he would come back and do that again for Milan. So I'm not 100% sure what was going on there, whether it was a tactical thing, whether he was injured and coming off the bench or what. But it wasn't his best season, but he was decisive in this game and decisive in the final as well.
Inter just weren't as good as Milan, Martin. It's that simple. Milan had a better side. And also, particularly at this time, particularly in this tournament, they had more confidence and more feeling of belonging and more experience, etc. All the things you want to say, but they simply were a better team 1-on-1 over 2 legs. They were the favourites going into it. They deserved to be. I think Inter played like a side who were more hoping to win than expecting to win over the 2 games. I think the right outcome, as you say, even though it is tight. And it's interesting that Milan, even in the time we've been doing this show, they go through this in this period, in their kind of glory years, to say this kind of 25-year period, that they'll go through these seasons, Adam, where they just stop scoring while they're trying something new. And it the famous title win when, what was it, 38 league goals in 34 matches. But this is maybe like the third time we've come across a Milan squad that doesn't score a lot of goals. And then the following year, they go back to scoring lots of goals. And it just seems that even a club that size, they're sort of allowed in this period, right? You can have a year to change things so long as you get 2 or 3 good ones following. And we know that they do, because obviously they reached the final this year, but then 2005, 2007, when one should have really won 2. So I just find it interesting that it's almost like a regular, semi-regular reset. Chelsea, Martin, in the modern era were a bit like that. They would have their off-season every so often, and then next year come back a league or a couple of cups.
So I was going to say, I wonder if it's to do with the defence, like you mentioned, because I mean, how often do we speak about Milan in the 90s and like things were changing ahead of them, but the defence didn't really change too much. So it's one of those things where you're having a season where the attack is sort of getting up to speed. There's a new formation, like you said, maybe the front six is a different sort of setup. Players are coming in, they're still getting to know each other in terms of movement, rhythm, all that sort of stuff. The defence remains the same. And you're looking at this final here, and you've still got Costa Curta playing. You've still got those guys that have been there for a long time. You move into the next couple, like you've said, you've got Cafu coming in as well, which certainly can't help. So there's this solid base, I guess. Two variations of it, one in the 90s and one in the mid 2000s. That it gives them, I guess, that platform, so they can be stuffy. If their forwards aren't firing, then it's likely they'll manage to get through with the odd goal. So yeah, I think you're right.
I think you're also right about Milan just having that recent confidence in the tournament, Davey, very similar to Madrid going way back, but they aren't fazed by this. And after some great unpleasantness, Inter have a thing about this tournament. They just don't. They never the same again, and it's a bit of a millstone. It'll take a special man to overcome that. One of the most overrated derbies in the world, by all accounts, quite confected, quite Disney-fied. I've never been myself, but there's certainly a lot that turn their nose up at it compared to maybe even some of the other Italian ones. Thoughts?
Well, Inter's biggest game of the season is Juve. The Derby d'Italia, and they'll be quite open about that. It's sort of Liverpool, Man U, yeah. And our fans will be quite upfront about that the one that they tick off on the calendar when the fixtures are announced is Juve. So yeah, maybe. I mean, you compare it to some of the other Italian derby, and by the way, it's the same for Juve. Obviously Torino. It's their local one. Who beat England in the Euros, Martin?
Spain.
Not España. All right, I thought we were doing that now. But yeah, I've lost my. See what you did.
Yeah, see. We'll be consistent. Say you're in then.
No, be consistent. You either call it España or you don't. So you're allowed to do it. You pick and choose. We won 2 wars. End the fucking story. Right? It's our language. If you don't count all the French words. Anyway, back to the matter in hand. Yeah. So for Juve, it's the same. For Inter, it's the same. It must be weird playing at the same stadium. Do you know what I mean?
I can't.
You take pride in your stadium. I love my. We're going through it at the time of recording that we haven't been in our stadium when we're all missing it like hell. But if it's kind of, imagine us in that lot sharing the same. No, just wouldn't be having that at all.
And all the players swapping as well.
For each other, yeah. That's true.
It just sort of takes it away. Obviously, they're two of the best teams in Italy and have been for such a long time. So it's not exactly it's not like a Juve Torino type thing there where there's one big and one small. I think the San Siro for me holds the most intrigue personally. Certainly now. you've had some great Milan teams and you've had some great Inter teams. I can't think off the top of my head where you've really had a great Milan and a great Inter at the same time, which probably
I often that's the case though in Italy and England and with some of these
probably has a bit of an impact on proceedings. But for me, it's I would like to go to Milan derby for the stadium. I don't necessarily want to go to experience a red hot atmosphere or anything like that, because I think a Lazio Roma is going to be 10 times better in that respect if you're going to Italy. So yeah, I get your point on it. It's a bit weird, and you can imagine Pally and they'll all be sitting next to each other at the with their different colours on and things, I would have thought, which when you think of Italian football you don't really think of. So yeah.
Staying with Milan then, let's go to the final. At Old Trafford, of course. We've kind of kept this back, Adam. This kind of Christmas tree that Ancelotti likes. I mean, who's in the team that evening? Dida in goals. Maldini, Calazzi, Nesta, Costa Curta, Gattuso, Pirlo, Seedorf, Rui Costa, Shevchenko, and Inzaghi playing against his former club, of course. How's this set up? How did it come to be?
So this is now Ancelotti as the 4-3-2-1 guy, I guess, or 4-3-1-2 right now, if we're being honest. I wrote about this in the Gerrard book, heavily influenced, I think, our formation in those first 3 years under Gerrard, heavily influenced by what Ancelotti did. We spoke, when was that? A few episodes ago, or a few seasons ago, I should say, when Ancelotti first took over at Juventus, and he was moving away from that 4-4-2 by being a bit more flexible. I think after his first season in Milan, Silvio Berlusconi thought he was maybe a little bit too defensive with what he was trying to do. So he's trying to think of ways that he can evolve. And pretty much from now, he's sort of stumbling across. If it's not 4-3-2-1 right now, because you've obviously got Shevchenko and Inzaghi, it's certainly 4-3. 3 solid midfielders, I guess, is the main crux of it, and then that front three that would flip about, I guess, until Kaká came in, and it was pretty obvious what was going to happen there. But it was a big change, I guess, for Milan, as we've charted all through. That wasn't really what they did. It probably aligned itself more to what Real Madrid, etc., were doing at the time, which I think really helped Ancelotti. He could sort of, you know what he's like. He's a master of finding solutions for the players that are there. And when you've got Pirlo, Gattuso, and Clarence Seedorf in your team, you want to just get the best out of those 3. What I think is really important, I don't know if people will know this or not, but this was the season that Pirlo moved back into that deeper line playmaker role. He had been a bit of a floaty, ineffectual number 10. I was wondering whether people thought maybe that it was only when he went to Juventus and Conte put him back in there, but no, he was here for a bit under Milan, playing that sort of regista, as they'll call it, and obviously would then go on to be one of the best deep line playmakers of all time. But yeah, 4-3-1-2 here, but broadly speaking, round about a Christmas tree formation. I think he just made the best of what he had. You look at the team that you've reeled off there, even the bench as well. You don't really have much natural width. You've got Serginho. I don't think if Rivaldo went out wide at this stage in his career, I'm not sure he would get back into the middle with his physique or his fitness. So it's not really anyone that's sort of broaching the flanks, and he just did what he had to do. He did what he worked with what he had. Obviously, what he had is great, but he did that there. I think what he did as well was something that we did see a bit, was 4 centre halves, basically. Maybe not something that we would see too often as the 2000s would go into the 2010s, but we had obviously Calazzi and Costa Curta as the fullbacks, and then Nesta and Maldini, who's a left-sided centre half by this point. And it just goes back to the point we were talking about there. You've got a relatively solid 4. Calazzi was decent, not amazing, but he was decent. But then you've got the 3 best centre halves probably still at this point, certainly outside of the Real Madrid for me. It really helps. You can even afford to have Dida in goals and still not really concede
Bless his heart.
too many. So yeah, it was just one of those things, one of those Ancelotti things that he become famous for. Just doing sensible things with an array of talent that he's got to get them working the way he wants. And here we are 20 years later and he's still doing it. Fun fact as well, that Christmas tree, he actually wrote a book entitled Il mio albero di Natale, which basically means my Christmas tree. It came out in 2014 and it was a coaching book basically on 4-3-2-1, what he thought was the best formation. I think it's only in Italian. I've not been able to track down a copy of it, but it came out in 2014. So such a big change for him from a few years later being a 4-4-2 guy to then being this guy and even liking it for so much that he would write a book on it 10 years later from what we're talking about now.
So you've got, in terms of that three, Davey, you've got Gattuso who just hassles and harries and constantly nipping at everything. You have the kind of deep line conductor and Pirlo. You have the ultimate European engines really, and Seedorf. He's just so good, as well as just seemingly everywhere. I mean, it's almost every archetype you want. The only one Rui Costa is he's very adaptable. He's a fantastic player. I would just maybe in my head think that he's maybe of more danger, just a little deeper as well. And Adam's kind of highlighted that he's obviously kind of coming to the end of his time, maybe. And you've got Kaká not far away, definitely more a number 10, definitely more kind of further forward, but he's not a bad player to have him. He's just so cultured, he can do what he likes. I mean, forget Woods, you've just got just about every characteristic you're looking for in a midfield, no?
Oh yeah, 100%, and a model for future success. The midfield that Juve would go on to have such success with had Pirlo, Pogba, and Arturo Vidal. It's the same roles, isn't it? It's you're asking people to do the same things because it works so well. The ball retention in there is just, you've got the wee Tasmanian devil who goes and gets it, and then he gives it to the guys who can play. But I'm glad you pointed out Seedorf's engine. On top of, look, he was lovely passer of a ball, but he moved, constantly and didn't stop. Was there to help shut down danger. So you've got two when you don't have the ball who can get you back really quickly. That takes almost all that burden off of Pirlo, and then his deep passing ability. Adam mentioned there, it's kind of surprising it took so long for people to put him there, because he could just make everything tick. He could just control the pace of a game. Rui Costa, by this stage, Martin, you're absolutely right, I think is a moments player. But what moments? He could conjure up. Yeah, he was a wonderful footballer. Kaká coming in is, I think, yes, as you mentioned there, that's more obviously he plays here and can do different things and be more involved. But I think that I'm always somebody who will say I'd like some width in a side, but if you are going to go for a tightly packed midfield, I think you said it right at the start. Aren't you just ticking off almost every box you would want in a central midfield with those three players? You really are.
And obviously, it illustrates the point quite nicely that we mentioned there that Pirlo left Inter for Milan the year before, and Seedorf left Inter for Milan this year that they win it, which will obviously just add a bit to that semi-final, I guess, where Pirlo was even less of a, what was I going to say, even less, or his qualities were even less understood at Milan. In Milan, I would say, where he was just that sort of number 10. They kind of thought he was the Baggio type player, which was never really going to materialise. And yeah,
he was elegant. That wasn't, that it's just his vision. You just can't utilise it fully that far up the pitch. There isn't the space to do it. But
yeah,
I think people are beginning now to understand in this era here that we're talking about, to early 2000s, that the guys who can set the tempo in the middle of the park are beginning to get the recognition that they didn't always get. Because, the really great teams always had it. The Liverpool team of the 80s, they were masters of it. But we're now beginning to appreciate if you like, the guys who are the ones who sit there. They're not the most they don't score a lot of goals, but the entire structure of the game is dictated, and of course we'll see that really become to its fruition, and everybody say, right, I get it, with the Xavi at Barcelona in a couple of years.
I think that's a good point to sort of for the next couple of shows, or the next couple of seasons, I should say, is because that midfielder then comes to the fore. I think because of advances in fitness and tactics and out of possession stuff, it is still all a bit frantic, and someone in there who can put their foot in the ball, who can make those passes, who can dictate the tempo of a game. There isn't really too many that you can think of. I know you've got Redondo and things, but even for me, that's still a slightly different thing than this. There's not too many of them about, but then you move 3 or 4 years and it's 10 a penny, and I think that's because they recognise how frantic it is in there. The space is limited because people are fitter, they're more tactically aware. We need someone in there who can take the ball and move it quickly, and I think that's where you see Pirlo was one of the first, I think, to certainly one of the first I can remember to be repurposed in that way. But like you said, as you come into the next couple of shows, even you've got Xavi Alonso, you've got guys like that are coming to England, and it's really starting to advance and adapt in that midfield.
Yeah, I think you're spot on when you say that because of the advances in fitness, if a midfield was going to be told, you couldn't have all Gattusos in there, because it was just there wasn't the space, there wasn't the room. You were getting closed down a lot quicker than you maybe would have in years previously. And if you had someone who could just play the game almost at their own pace, and at certain times just say, right, we're going to slow it down now, lads, for 5 minutes. And the tactical knowledge of these sides, and then the tactical knowledge of these players that they bring, to the Premier League, it just increases it so much. And yeah, there is a real argument that was the player that England squad of this era didn't have. If they'd had that, would they have won tournaments? I genuinely believe they would, because they had everything else. But what 100%. They didn't have was that guy to say, right, 10 minutes here, we're under the cosh a bit, lads. Don't worry, I'll keep the ball and we'll take that out of them. And even now, as we record in 2024, the final when England scored against Spain, España, wasn't there an amazing stat that then Spain kept the ball? Yeah. I think something like 89% for the next 10 minutes, and then that was it. England
work around,
yeah, because when they scored, they're up, they've got the momentum. You think, here we go, right? This is England are going to go on and do this now. But Spain went, okay, right? We're not going to just rush frantically at them, because if it becomes end to end, they'll probably beat us. So this is what we'll do. And England just have never had that player. Whereas you look at these guys that are coming through now. Adam mentioned of Xabi Alonso. I loved Xabi. He was so elegant. And in the hurly-burly of a Premier League, to be able to just do that, and people looked at him and admired him, and then every club in England wanted one. But it really is Pirlo. I agree. He's the first one I can remember at this level. And then Xavi at Barca became, I think, the definitive. But it was Pirlo being that guy. And I'm just so surprised that because you're right, at Inter he was a number 10. He would do the odd amazing thing, but a lot of games passed him by. And it's amazing when you think about how great he was in this role that it took so long to put him there.
Yeah, interesting point about England. I mean, the hurly-burly is the right word, Davey. And even if England did have Pirlo, or a Pirlo, there's no guarantees he plays. There's no guarantees he's respected. There's no guarantees he's valued, because is he a bit slow?
Yeah.
Is he really, I mean, England had, now, give me the license here, go back 20 years, England had Ray Wilkins and didn't really understand how to use him. Didn't understand how to use Hoddle.
Michael Carrick.
Michael Carrick is just about to kind of come through. There's just this lack of trust. There was this lack of trust in that type of player, because it's not box to box, 100 miles an hour. It's languid. And there's a whole show in that. And come on, I'm all for tactical innovations, but 4 central defenders, Rangers were miles ahead of the curve for that by 2003. And Seedorf going for his third. Well, he's third Champions League win with a third club, which I don't think had been done before now. Adam, before we go to Juve,
that's one that always sticks in my head. The Seedorf one, definitely. It was 3 with 3 different clubs. I can't remember when it got beaten. But it was one that way just always sticks in your head that you remember he was the first to do it.
Yeah. Before we go into Juve and how they're put together, Adam, is our friend People, any different in this Milan side with that formation behind him, with a partner like Shevchenko, who is very different from Vieri or Ravanelli or anyone else that he would have played with at Juve?
No. I think he just does his same thing. Interestingly, and I've not actually probably not thought about it until you mentioned it there, it's a very similar front two to Shevchenko and Rebrov at Kiev. I think just that type of the balance there. I would never say that Shevchenko was a deeper second striker or support striker, whatever you want to call it. But his link-up play was obviously a good bit better. And I think when Inzaghi is playing, every other striker is going to be slightly a couple of yards behind them because he's obviously a couple of yards offside most of the time. But by nature, I think that's the way it's going to go. So I wouldn't say he was particularly different. The goal scoring certainly wasn't different. He's 30 goals here. I think might be his best ever return. He had a couple of really good seasons for Juve a couple of years before, I think, but this year he was absolutely on fire. All those goals we've spoken about in the last couple of shows, those ones that 1 or 2 touches, and is he offside, is he onside, is he scrambling in the net? You see all of these in this run for him. So I wouldn't say particularly adapted. I think as it is Ancelotti, and again I'll bang that drum again. He's playing to a player's strengths. He gets players around him. Legs around them that you mentioned, Gattuso and Seedorf, as those kind of, call them probably box to box number 8s now. They weren't quite doing that then. Rui Costa, for me, I kind of disagree with you. I think he's a pure number 10. And they're just basically, you think it works in a really, for me, it works in a really sensible way because you've got the 4 defenders, give the ball to Pirlo. Pirlo can get the ball either through to Rui Costa or Gattuso and Seedorf are going causing chaos without those sort of vertical runs, and then someone can get the ball through to Shevchenko, who lays it off to Inzaghi. It all feels very simple, but they scored some amount of goals through doing things like that. So I think it was one of those formations that was set up to get the best out of the players that he had available, and I think Inzaghi probably typifies it. This was his best. I would say this was his best for Milan, certainly, if not. I think I probably still marginally preferred them a couple of years earlier at Juve. Maybe I liked that team a little bit more. I'm not sure, but I don't think he ever quite hit these heights again for Milan.
Juve then, Adam. Buffon and goals, Thuram, Ferrara, Tudor, Montero, Camoranesi, Tacchinardi, David Zambrotta, and Del Piero and David Trezeguet. Who is in for Nedved then? You also mentioned that's a huge factor in this final. But how different is, if at all, is this Lippi team from the 3 finals in a row in the 90s? Has it altered at all?
So I don't think that is good. I think that's, for me, that's blindingly obvious. I don't think they are as good. They've still got the elements of Lippi that we've spoken about, where you've got a guy like Gianluca Zambrotta who could have been Birindelli, Pisotto reincarnate. He was that type of guy. Always remember him on Championship Manager, and he was left back, right back, left mid, right mid, potentially left wing, right wing as well. I'm not sure. I think he might have had all 6 of the wide positions in his arsenal. I think he probably typifies that Lippi approach even now, 10 years later, as we're talking about it. Another fullback at centre half type thing here, Paulo Montero. Watching back the game, the amount of last gasp tackles he got in, or headers, or clearances. He's just that type of guy, just a big, nasty defender. But he's in there at fullback. Igor Tudor, Ciro Ferrara. Again, we've seen Ciro Ferrara countless Champions League finals now, either playing centre half or right back. But in this case, obviously Thuram is at right back, therefore he's filling in there. Not a massive fan of the midfield or the midfield setup in here. Davids and Takenardi just doesn't have enough about it for me. They're both maybe just a little bit not similar, because Davies is obviously significantly better, but there's not one that stays and one that goes. It's very much a sort of functional two, maybe that we see now in those sort of 4-2-3-1 formations. It's maybe a little bit similar to that sort of double pivot thing. Again, for Juve, what they've got that probably sets them apart. Maybe not in this game, but sets them apart, I think, overall, is obviously that front two with Del Piero and Trezeguet, who were two players absolutely at their peak. Trezeguet in particular, I think at this point was everywhere, wasn't he? He was the golden boy the season before for Juventus, got ridiculous amount of goals for them there, and would go on and do another couple of really good seasons for them. And he was one of my favourites at this point. I always felt like obviously Henry gets the credit and gets the plaudits of being the French centre forward, but I was a big fan of Trezeguet as well at this time.
That evening, I don't know, just after 7 o'clock, I was in the car driving somewhere, and 5 Live was on, and it might have been Mark Pugac or Mike Higgins or whoever was on at the time. Said he was speaking to a friend, there's a Champions League final tonight. All right, who's playing? Juve versus Milan. I'll turn it on for the penalties. So there was this kind of feeling in advance that this was not going to be a goal fest, wide open, typical Italian stereotypes, etc., etc., etc. And it has gone down in infamy as a stinker. Now, I'll lay off the jokes and lay off the shtick for a bit. Of course, there are better Champions League finals than this, but I think it's harshly treated. It is not 1991, it should be said, where Marseille played Red Star Belgrade, and Marseille were terrified about Red Star Belgrade being technically best team in Europe. But Red Star Belgrade played in the Yugoslav League at the time, where if you drew a game, you had a penalty shootout, and they won a lot of penalty shootouts and were very confident in winning that, so hardly bothered to go over the halfway line, and Marseille didn't really know what to do, and the game was just appalling. This isn't like that. The ball spends a lot of time in the box. It's just that defences are absolutely superb. The amount of interceptions and great reading of the game. Now, there are chances. Buffon makes an incredible save from Pippo Inzaghi with a header. Sheva was unlucky as well. And Conte hits the bar. But where I would defend it, Adam, is the tempo and the pace. This is not a kind of one of those plodding, timid, terrified games. There's a lot of zip. The ball is moving about, controlled well. There's a lot of good build-up play. As I said, it spends a lot of time in those final thirds. It's just that the defences are superb, and that's allowed. And that's also good. They're skillful. You're allowed to be good at defending. I know not these days, but there's something, I mean, Maldini's going to walk away with man of the match because he's fucking brilliant, and that's to be applauded sometimes.
So I think there's two sides of that to me. Watching it back, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of really, really good defending in there. I think there's, outside of the save from, I think it was from Inzaghi, Buffon save from Inzaghi in the first half was genuinely terrific. Outside of that, there's maybe not much keeper-wise in that sense, and I think maybe that does them a little bit of a disservice. You don't really have any of those big saves that we've seen in some of these games. There's a lot of really sensible defending, you're right. There's a lot of clever defending. I mentioned Montero. There's a lot of quite cynical defending as well. There's one in the second half, though, when I think it's Inzaghi, the ball gets played over, and he's sort of trying to header it, and he just gets slightly out-muscled, and it kind of goes wide. So, I take your point on that. But there's not a huge amount of clear-cut chances. There's not a huge amount of teams being unlocked or passed through. I guess that's the two polarising sides of the debate there. Is it because of great defending, or is it because of poor attacking. It's one of those things you'll never know. But yeah, I also don't think the penalties do them any favours at all.
We'll come with the penalties in a minute. Extra time, David, is horrible, and it is ragged. And in a way, I think it bolsters my point. The two teams are shattered. It's genuine heavyweights, but going at it in their own particular way. It isn't two teams just camped in their own half saying, no, after you, Claude, after you. I know what Adam's saying, that the actual saves, there's not many to talk about, clear-cut chances. I don't believe it's because of the lack of quality in attack. We've just waxed lyrical about some of the kind of attacking players and the setups. They've met their match, no?
Yeah, I think so. I think that kind of like a movie, they always say, if it has a really good ending or a really bad ending, it's what you take out the cinema. I think this match is a bit like that, because you're right about the extra time. One, the silver goal in the first half, so neither are particularly up for that, I think. And then they're just very tired by the end. And you can see that, and you see actually it continues on into the penalties. But yeah, I think that the fact that the game kind of draws to that insipid close in extra time. Extra time's usually rubbish, isn't it? I mean, it's just a bad.
Very rare.
Get rid of it. I mean, I can't think of many games where that extra time was absolutely brilliant. There are moments in this. I think the disallowed goal in an era of VAR might well have been allowed. I think they might have looked and maybe checked that offside, and because to me he moves out of the position. Now, from what the linesman is watching or sees, fair enough, but I think he moves out of the position. So I think that may be, and then an early goal and you've got a completely different match. A couple of times, they both hit the woodwork. But I think also it's human nature that when you are, in the 80th minute of the Champions League final, you begin to think, let's not lose this in the next 10 minutes. Let's get to extra time. Then you go into extra time, and extra time, the world over, tournament over, caution. There's far more caution in it because you think, at worst, I'd rather take my chances on penalties. So I don't think there's anything unusual there. Had this game finished 1-1, for example, the two that hit the bar had gone in, then it doesn't have this stigma. Level of a stigma. Yeah, that's a great word for it. For me, though, it's the way it ends, because it sort of dribbles to a conclusion, and that isn't unusual. But having watched 90 minutes, I'm always of the opinion, though, and this maybe just me, so long as it isn't my team, when it's completely different, if we've got to extra time, I'm sort of wanting penalties. I feel we've earned penalties at that stage.
I mean, we all kind of disagree on this, but give me this final any time over next year where there's one team that turn up and one team that don't, and it's 3-0, and we might as well not have tuned in because it's such a demolition. Apart from
Real, 94. But Valencia Real was like this, where Real weren't brilliant, but Valencia were awful.
They just get stage fright, and
they just didn't turn up yet. So you're right. I mean, 94 is different because it's a splendid performance from a great team. And it was also funny, but it was great to watch as well. It was quality. Whereas the finals where a team turns up completely overawed, the other team realise it and just effortlessly put them away.
I'm just all for tension in sport. It's just that's what you want in a final. Extra time's poor. Adam, these penalties, dear Lord. Trezeguet misses, Serginho scores, Bradelli misses, Seedorf scores, the aforementioned Seedorf, then Zalieta misses, and Kaladze misses, and Montero misses, Nesta scores, Del Piero scores, and Shevchenko rolls home for the win. David mentioned VAR before. Dida is about the 6-yard line for some of these penalties.
He's at fucking main road for 3 of them.
It's appalling scenes from the goalkeeper.
It's the only chance you get to save them, to be honest, because he's absolutely hopeless. I think Ancelotti got maybe a bit of stick. Remember the mistake Dida made? Obviously, that Celtic Park or Parkhead thing, the controversy a couple of years later. But the one against Leeds was an absolute shocker. Remember a couple of years before.
Isn't that
but
good?
yeah,
I mean, it really was that simple. No. I didn't get it myself, but
he'd have been better with Paolo Rossi probably. Not Paolo Rossi, Sebastian Rossi.
Sebastiano.
Still the goals at this time. If good penalties are ones that go in, then I think that's absolutely fine. But then by that logic, the five penalties that were missed were all absolutely horrific. Just
they were.
the worst penalties. There's no. I don't think there's a good save in them. Really, or certainly not a very, very, very good save. They're just down the middle, just slightly to the side. Just the worst penalties you can ever think about from guys that Trezeguet, Seedorf, Zaliator scored a couple of really good goals in this run, and just I think for me this is probably when you get to this point of this game and it hasn't been that exciting, and then you get these penalties and you're like, what is going on? I mean, you get there's 2 goals for the first 7 penalties, and it's just not just very much not what you're after.
No, and again, that sullies the reputation of the final. I totally appreciate that. Conscious of time, so 1 point each before we go. Davey, all Italian final, Inter also in the semi-final. Many could be forgiven for thinking the boys are back in town, Serie A dominating again. This is, the 90s. We've just gone through a little breather and we're back, but a false dawn a wee bit. Milan, a different case, but just in terms of the strength of the league, because those days have long gone by now.
Yeah, it was a last hurrah, but of course you don't see that at the time because they're looking at it the last 10 years, and to them it's a continuation as opposed to looking at the trends that are coming. A big part of that is the tactical evolution we're about to see in England, because Jose Mourinho is going to turn up, Rafa Benitez is going to turn up, and suddenly you've got these English teams with all the kind of physical attributes that we've spoken about, but they're tactically a match, if not better, than these other teams. So you get this hegemony. You get the great Barca side of the mid-2000s. The sort of first great Barca side comes through, and Spanish football begins, a Serie A domination that hasn't let up at time of recording, if we're being honest about it, across all European and even international tournaments. So it was the kind of the last days of Rome seems an appropriate description of it. But I think you can still have this at times where a nation brings a few teams through, and it doesn't speak to, for me, in a year, and you'll always get these articles, there's 3 German teams have reached, or there's 3 English teams in semi. I'm always like, well, yes, in one year anything can happen. Let's not. I mean, a couple of years ago when Manchester City won the treble, you'll recall that the other semi-final was a Milan derby again.
Mm.
That did not mean that Serie A was a strong league, because it isn't, and it was just an anomaly. But at this point, they had, as I say, the kind of 10 years to go on, and maybe deluded themselves a wee bit, Martin. I think Serie A, the Serie A has a tendency to do this. And in fact, as I spoke about a couple of years ago, they were saying, is this Serie A back? Is this us back? No, it's not. It was one good year with a couple of good runs. But it was a very, very interesting final. And for me, I think that it's this one in particular that Juve fans sort of look back on and think that's the one that got away from us. And to this day, there are a few, and to this day, they will still complain that Dida was allowed the freedom of the penalty box to do it. But if you watch, Buffon isn't exactly.
No, it's probably more commonplace than we remember, Davey. I think that's maybe
why it was banned, isn't it? I mean, if it wasn't a thing, it wouldn't have been banned.
Adam, we'll finish on Carlo. Again, another European title to his name. He would be collecting a lot more over the next 20 years. For the tactics aficionados, for systems guys, for process guys, is he a kind of kryptonite in terms of this affable guy who just turns up, give me that player, I'll assemble in whatever way kind of works. I will not spend 1 minute outside of work thinking about work, and it's just players, and I'll just kind of cuddle them and just get them all in an order, and off we go.
Yeah, I think it's nice to think that, isn't it? It's nice to think that someone can do that, but I think it is doing him a bit of a disservice that he's just there and saying, "On you go, you let's just you do what you like, and we'll go with it." I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's something that he would say. I don't think it's something that the players would say. I think there's skill in managing big personalities, and I think the great managers have done that. You look at Ferguson, you look at Mourinho. Even maybe he falls out with everybody eventually, but like you can't guarantee that in the first couple of years, at most of his clubs, he's got players doing things that other managers wouldn't get them to do. So it's just for me, that's just a different type of that. Guardiola as well, again, he falls out with big personalities potentially at some points, but again, how often do you hear of many issues at Man City? If someone does have an issue like Joao Cancelo, they get bulleted very, very quickly, and it's uncompromising. So I don't think Ancelotti is like that. But I do think, as we see and as we'll go on to when he's moving into Chelsea, Real Madrid, there is an adaptability there, 100%, and he has to be able to get his point across and manage players. He has to get players to buy into things, particularly in the modern age now. Players aren't just going to do what you say there. But it'll be interesting when we chart it, because obviously he does have that little bit of dip in the middle, and it is still bizarre that he ends up at Everton. Just randomly. So there's obviously a dip there, and there's obviously
it wasn't that random. He had 14.5 million reasons for it every year, and every one of them had the Queen's head on it. The highest paid manager.
He should have had the option of it. He should have been in Scotland somewhere a hell of a lot better. That just wouldn't have been on his radar.
The highest paid manager in the world at the time, guys. Genuinely, he was.
Yeah.
But it's funny that, isn't it? Because although that's there as well, maybe it spoke to maybe that little bit of a lull there where it became.
Aye, because he had done that well at Napoli. People forget that. That was what, he'd gone to Napoli, and he was sort of seen in the way that maybe Conte is seen now, interestingly enough, that he's at Napoli, where he'd had he'd been at the very, very top, and then had just slipped a little, and then he goes to Napoli and it doesn't work out. And you know what the world of football is like? It's like, well, that's him done. Right? He's had his run now. So he goes to Everton. By the way, where you know how Josie sometimes says that getting that Man United team to second was one of his biggest achievements. He got Everton to 8th. Yeah. Right. So, given what we
he just manages, right? I mean,
he just manages, and then he goes. But then Madrid, who know that sometimes you need a certain personality as much as you need, they go and bring him back, and of course, it's the perfect fit for everyone. But yeah, I do think, though, I really am looking forward to 30 years when people sit down in the way that we sit down and we look at Saki, or we look at even further back, Helenio, that they'll sit down and they'll go, Juve, AC Milan, Real Madrid. What the fuck was he? Everton? Is this a misprint?
It's a wee holiday for him. He likes a wee season off. Cheers, boys. That's us for 2002-2003. I'm sure you're delighted to get that one over, Davey and Adam. Thank you, Davey.
Yeah, it was. I think on here, one of the reasons that we do it is to go back and see that things that have slipped into consciousness, even our own consciousness, as fact, maybe they aren't. And I think that this final deserves a wee bit of a reappraisal.
Adam?
Yeah, I disagree on the final. It's just not.
he's not having that at all.
It's not for me. I can appreciate good players in there. I can appreciate some interesting defensive battles in there. But yeah, I want to see goals. I want to see good moves. I want to see all that excitement in the showpiece game of the year. So yeah, not for me. I would argue that maybe next year is exciting, but maybe not. The quality is maybe not there. So I kind of take Martin's point on that side of it. But yeah, as we go in, obviously there's more. As you alluded to, Martin, there's definitely more glamorous, more exciting finals to look forward to. So yeah, looking forward to dig into them.
I'm still interested to see if we ever get a last 8 like this year, right enough, because that seems like the
Yeah, that's
absolute
true.
creme de la creme.
Yeah.
And no second phase anymore. That's gone as of next season. It'll be right into the round of 16 after these group stages, and group stages that you could sit at home and watch whatever game you wanted because it was now on Sky, and we had the choice of whatever you wanted, which is remarkable. So that'll be next week, May 2003. No bad. I wouldn't mind going back there with Rangers winning trebles and exciting All-Italian Champions League finals. Wasn't the only European final, of course. The UEFA Cup final took place not long before that Champions League final, won by a swarthy, handsome Portuguese man, and thank goodness he did. Wonder what happens next in his story. Until next time, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.